And welcome to the newest installment of the River City Whiskey Society's virtual tastings. We've been doing these for a couple months now amongst this really fun and awesome pandemic. But the thing that we're mixing up here is we are doing it with some American whiskey, which we have somehow avoided the entire time. But we're very excited, and we wanted to bring some brands in that we actually really enjoy, and did one of our best live tastings back when that was a thing. It seems like it was years and years ago. But today we're going to be featuring Heaven Hill, and we're really excited about that. We have Jack with us, who's the West Coast ambassador. Is that correct, Jack?
Yeah, I'm the West Coast whiskey educator and ambassador for Heaven Hill Distillery.
Nice. So an educator as well. So we're getting 2-for-1 on this, you guys. That's those are the kind of people that we get for you here. Just so you know, at some point, Ro will be throwing in some links onto the chat. That way he can let you guys know about all the great deals that we're going to have through on all of these different whiskeys available to you. If you have questions as we go through this, either put them into the chat, or there's a raise your hand feature, or you can just unmute yourself. I mean, you're not children, so we obviously respect you guys. We know you're gonna be good. So thank you for continuing to support us through these very strange times. We're always looking for fun ways to engage with people and to just find different ways to reach out and still stay connected, even though we can't do the live events like we were doing before. We have some really fun barrel picks coming up, and so definitely keep your guys' eye out on that. If you're not already a part of the River City Whiskey Society, please go ahead and join us on Facebook. We also just started a dedicated page. That way we can kind of control announcements and stuff like that. And the group is more of a celebration of whiskey just in the Sacramento area. But let's see, Tracy just typed in, oh yeah, they did find our larceny barrel. So that's awesome.
Finally.
That
Everyone
was,
can pick up their bottles.
Yeah, so that was lost in transit for a bit there. But they have been able to find it. And I know, and I think I'm pretty infamous at this point for not being the biggest American whiskey fan, but I do have exceptions. Larceny is one of them. So so definitely
you just
check
made
this.
Up for it.
Yeah. Well, hey, someone's got to be the outlier in this group of bourbon drinkers. So, right. But yeah, it's a fantastic whiskey. You guys should definitely check it out. I think the guys always do an amazing job of picking the very best for all of us to enjoy. So I know we have a lot of supporters on here already. You guys, thank you so much for always, buying these bottles from us. If you've never bought one of our barrel picks, you got to stop sleeping on them because they are great. These guys do a really good job. So with all that being said, I'm going to step back and I'm going to let Jack be the expert, because that's exactly what he is. As you heard, he is the West Coast educator and ambassador. It's the 2-for-1 deal. It's River City Whiskey Society virtual tasting. Jack, take it away, my friend.
Drew, thanks very much. 2 titles. I still only get 1 paycheck, unfortunately, but I get all the whiskey that I can drink. So I guess I'll have to live with it, right? How's everybody doing tonight? I think everybody's on mute. So if everybody just wants to give me a wave, if you're doing good. I mean, it's what time is it? I'm actually on the East Coast, today. So what is it? 6 o'clock in California? Yeah. My family and we were on the East Coast visiting family. I have an 18-month-old, and Drew, you said you have a 2-year-old, letting our 18-month-old spend some time with the grandparents. And, when we were looking at our flights back, we were noticing a little bit of a smoke and fire situation. And we live in San Francisco, and the air quality, I think today for the first day, has dropped below 100 for the first time in like 10 days. So it's 9:15 where I am. So I am excited and ready to drink some whiskey with y'all and talk to you a little bit about Heaven Hill. Y'all look like very seasoned veterans when it comes to drinking whiskey. So I'm not going to mess around with a lot of the history of our company. Show of hands, has everybody heard of Heaven Hill Distillery? Everybody's pretty familiar with who we are and what we do. Cool. So just, I know I said I won't touch on it at all, but I'm going to, Tracy will get mad at me. Everyone can see T Moore there in the screen. Tracy is one of our wonderful Northern California salespeople, and she's been helping Row and y'all get all of the great whiskeys from Heaven Hill for almost 15 years, I think, with Heaven Hill. So she is definitely a veteran with us. So everyone say hi to her, and if you see her once this pandemic lives its life out, hopefully make sure she buys you a pour of whiskey in the Sacramento area. So Heaven Hill, we are the largest family-owned and operated distilled spirits company in the United States. We are owned and operated by the Shapiro family. A handful of family members make each and every decision that we do day in and day out. Max Shapiro, who is the second generation, is at the office 6 days a week. Max's father, Ed, and his uncles, Gary, George, David, and Mose, founded the company along with a couple of members of the Beam family, Harry and Joe Beam, who had just returned from Mexico after the repeal of Prohibition. They were our distilling know-how. The Shapiro family was really the cash infusion that helped get the business off the ground. December 13th, 1935, we barreled our first barrel of whiskey. We started selling whiskey futures to our wholesaler partners to keep the lights on. It's a practice that we still continue to this day. It's one of the reasons that we're able to offer you so many of the great whiskeys that we'll be tasting tonight at what we think is extremely affordable prices. A lot of ups and downs in the American whiskey industry through the 20th century. Of course, Prohibition was repealed in 1933, and not even 10 years later, the U.S. government shuts distilleries down again at the start of America's entry into World War II to produce high-proof alcohol for the war effort. It's around this time, at the end of World War II, when Earl Beam becomes our master distiller. He's the cousin to Harry Beam, the nephew to Joe Beam. Earl then is our master distiller until his son Parker comes into the spectrum in 1960. 1960 is also the next hallmark of negativity in the world of American whiskey. It's when vodka and tequila first enter the U.S. market, and that's really when American whiskey starts the downturn that we are now just coming back from today. 1975, Parker Beam becomes our master distiller. 1972, the gentleman I already mentioned, Max Shapiro, returns after a brief career on Wall Street to help his dad and his uncles run the business of Heaven Hill Distilleries. And he brings with him a very important business philosophy, which if any one of us have financial portfolios today, you'll hear it from your financial advisor all the time: diversify, diversify, diversify. And it's that theme that has allowed us to become the largest family-owned and operated distilled spirits company in the U.S. Because while American whiskey has remained to be our main focus throughout our almost 85 years of business, we'll celebrate our 85th year on December 13th of this year. So please raise a glass of Evan Williams or Bernheim or Mellowcorn or Rittenhouse or Pikesville or whatever it is that you have from Heaven Hill on that day. But it's that diversification that has allowed us to be sitting extremely pretty, in my opinion, in the world of American whiskey 2020. Along with the diversification, Max and Parker combined. They were great partners in working, and it's a wonderful thing to hear Max talk about his memories of, almost 50 years of working with Parker at the distillery. We, of course, unfortunately lost Parker Beam after a 5-year battle with ALS in January of 2017. But it was Max and Parker, along with their friends throughout the industry in the 80s, that really lit a fire under the industry. Of course, that fire was really only smoke until about the year 2000, but they were responsible for the creation of these things that folks like y'all and whiskey clubs around the country and world love today: small batches and single barrels, right? Elijah Craig was one of the first small batch whiskeys that came out in 1986. Before that term was even coined by the Beam Company when they released the small batch collection a few years later. And then, of course, single barrels started to come out, Blanton's being the first release from our friends now at Buffalo Trace. It was called H&H at that time. But then we followed suit shortly thereafter with Parker's most favorite and prized creation of his own, the Evan Williams single barrel. So I think that is by far the quickest I've ever done an overview of the history of Heaven Hill, and I'm extremely proud of myself because, as Tracy will tell you, and my wife will happily walk in the door and tell you, I can be somewhat long-winded. So I like what I did there. I'm pretty laid back in these tastings. I know everybody's on mute. Please use the chat function as much as you want. If you have something that's absolutely burning that you need to say, raise your hand, give me a thumbs up, whatever. I'm more than happy to make this as much of an open conversation as we possibly can with Zoom and everyone sort of not speaking all over each other. So just a couple of other numbers before I jump into the 5 or 6 great whiskeys that we're going to be tasting tonight. We not only are we the largest family-owned and operated distilled spirits company, we have the 2nd largest holding of bourbon in the United States. Beam again has the largest holding. Our distillery is the largest single-site bourbon production facility in the world. We're making just over 1,300 barrels of whiskey a day. Beam again makes more barrels of bourbon a day, but they have 2 production facilities. We're very proud of the fact that our one does 1,300, and it's actually about 1,321 is what we do in a day. We have about 58 warehouses or rick houses holding just over 1.7 million barrels. And there again, Beam trumps us on that. But it's not about the numbers for us. It never has been. It never will be. It's always been, ever since those 5 brothers' father, the original Max Shapira, immigrated from Lithuania through the port of New Orleans in the 1870s with nothing but a knapsack on his back and became a traveling salesman, and so successful at that to be able to set his sons up with brick and mortar retail stores to then be able to be wealthy enough, if you will, to be able to be the cash infusion for this new distillery in 1935. His philosophy was make the best possible product that you can, or offer the best possible product and sell it at the best possible price. Of course, if you're a salesman, you want to be able to make a little money to be able to support your family. And we still are able to do that. Don't worry about that. But it's our goal each and every day to make the best possible product that we can and offer it at the best possible price for you guys out there every day. And hopefully you guys already recognize that, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that today. But those 1.7 million barrels covering 58 warehouses, which all in all cover about 42 square miles, is really where we're going to focus tonight's topic on. And with that, let's get into a little bit of tasting. Like I said, I'm in Georgia on the East Coast. I'm not in California. I don't have my full collection. So I unfortunately don't have all of the whiskeys either. But I've put together, I think I should be able to share the screen. It's lit up green. I put together just a quick little tasting thing for y'all, and hopefully you can see this. Let me know, can y'all see me as well as what's on my screen right now? Somebody, Lou, Saul, shake your head.
Yes,
okay, cool. I can see you guys. I just threw this together right now, so you may have a couple of little sales notes on there, but don't worry about it. Y'all are getting the inside track on the educational train today. So the first whiskey that we're going to taste, and the whiskeys that we're going to taste tonight, alongside of those numbers that I threw out there, we're the only distillery of American whiskey that is distilling all 5 types of American whiskey, straight American whiskey, as defined by the U.S. Standards of Identity. So the laws and rules and regulations that Congress has written and passed. So each one of the classifications of these whiskey operate under specific standards and rules as far as their production and what's in the bottle. So we're gonna taste a wheat whiskey, a wheated bourbon, a corn whiskey, a rye whiskey, a traditional and 2 traditional Kentucky straight bourbons, which would be the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel, and then the Heaven Hill 7-year bottled and bond. So the first one that we're going to kick off with, and you'll notice that for the most part, I'm going to go from lowest proof up to the highest proof tonight. There's one in there that's sort of going to throw us off kilter, but it's okay because of its style of production and mash bill. Hey, Tracy, I know that you were able to jump in and speak. I can't see the chat in this view, so if there's a question that needs to be answered, just chime in and let me know. I can see some stuff up there shining, but I can't see it.
Yeah,
So,
I did see that, Jack. Thank you. I did see
Okay.
some questions, but I thought maybe we could wait and then
Yep.
maybe do some questions at the end, if that's okay.
Whatever everybody wants, that's fine with me. So
Okay.
the first whiskey that we're going to taste tonight is our Bernheim wheat whiskey. And Bernheim is a wheat whiskey. It is not a wheated bourbon. You can see that I've highlighted that down there at the bottom for our sales team on the bottom bullet of this slide. Wheat whiskey is the first new classification of American whiskey that was produced since the repeal of Prohibition. There were no wheat whiskeys on the market until Bernheim came to be. And really, Bernheim came to be almost by accident. We'll talk about this on the next whiskey, but we acquired the brand Old Fitzgerald in 1999 during the acquisition of our current distillery. And we had never dealt with wheat prior to that. We had never made wheated bourbon. We had never made wheat whiskey. So it was sort of a guessing game. We were only about 20 years into making rye whiskey, but we knew that we had heard via our family members and friends that worked at other distilleries that wheat and rye worked very similarly in the mashing and fermentation process, AKA they were both a pain in the ass in the mashing and fermentation process. So basically what we did when we had an extra truck of wheat delivered to our distillery is we basically mimicked our rye whiskey mash bill. Now the rye whiskey mash bill, which you'll see in a slide here in a little bit, is a little bit different than this. You need a little bit malted barley to help that fermentation get off the ground in the terms of rye whiskey. But at the 51%, you have the minimum amount of wheat that's required in a wheat whiskey, 37% corn, and then the 12% malted barley. And you'll see a minimum of 12% malted barley in each one of our straight whiskeys. That's basically where Parker and his dad set on with our mash bills so that we didn't really have to add any enzymes to kick off the fermentation process. The malted barley does that on its own naturally when interacting with the starches to convert those sugars to alcohol in both the corn and the wheat. So the Bernheim product was created in 2001. We launched it in 2006 as a 5-year-old product. When we took that original run off the still for the first time, we weren't even sure if we were going to like it. We really just let it age, and we released it at 5 years old because it tasted good at 5 years old and we didn't know what else to do with it. And what we did was we let some of those original barrels sit for a handful of years, more than a decade actually. And those of you who've been drinking American whiskey for a handful of years and following what we do at Heaven Hill, our annual release of our Parker's Heritage Collection in 2014 was actually a 12-year-old wheat whiskey. And it was the bottling of that original run of what eventually became Bernheim at an overproof 12-year-old age statement. When that 12-year-old whiskey had gotten to 7 years old, we tasted that. The 5-year-old stuff had been on the market for a couple of years at that time. We looked at our numbers and we went, ooh, we got to switch this 5-year-old to a 7-year-old. It just shines a heck of a lot better. So it took a number of years, about 8 years, for us to have enough 7-year-old whiskey to then we could relaunch that Bernheim at with a 7-year-old age statement, and also do a Parker's Heritage release of that same distillate in the same year in 2014. We like to start. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just going to interject for a moment. The question that Jeff had asked relates a little bit to what you're talking about. He said, Are there any plans for Heaven Hill to do any other malted whiskey besides the Parker's?
As of now, there's nothing that I've heard of as far as malt whiskey, but I imagine that it's something that could possibly happen. We have a handful of experimental mash bills, a handful of experimental chars, a handful of experimental barrels in the warehouses with various things, and they are tasting them on a regular basis. The Parker's Heritage Collection is really our experimental collection, if you will. That was how we released that malt whiskey back in 2015, I believe it was. But as of now, there's nothing on the horizon that I've been made aware about. But good question. So the wheat whiskey we start with in the tasting because obviously it's 90 proof, but the wheat is soft, right? When you're talking about the grains that are in these mash bills, so the corn, the wheat, the rye, you want to think about the types of breads that are made of those same grains, right? Corn bread, really sweet. I had some cornbread with dinner tonight. Rye bread, sort of spicy, off-putting, if you will. You know, one of my favorite sandwiches now is a pastrami and rye, but when I was a little kid, rye bread was the most disgusting thing that I could put in my mouth. My palate hadn't developed. I think about rye whiskey about that a lot. It took me a handful of years of drinking American whiskey before my palate actually enjoyed and really got some of the nuanced flavors that you get in a rye whiskey. And then the joke that I make about wheat bread is wheat bread really doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. A little bit of softness, a little bit of sweetness maybe, but wheat bread is really just a vehicle to get the bacon, the lettuce, and the tomato in your mouth, right? Wheat in a mash bill works exactly the same way. Yes, it provides a little bit of sweetness, but not a ton. It's very soft. It really sort of lays down and lets that corn shine through. So you have about 51% softness, maybe a little bit of sweetness in the wheat, and then 37% of that corn. So you're getting a very sweet nose on this whiskey. You're getting a pretty sweet taste on the front of your palate. And then as it gets across and into your back palate and into a nice finish, you're getting some of those more complex flavors. You're getting some berry, you're getting some of that spice. When I teach our sales team how to sell this, this bottom bullet point that you see here, this was how the light bulb went off in my mind when I was sitting across from a bartender in San Francisco when they were asking me about products that maybe they hadn't tasted before. And I mentioned Bernheim and he was like, oh yeah, it's not a bourbon, is it? And I was like, oh my God, it's not a bourbon. It's not a rye. And you have to think about that when you're tasting this, because if you go in thinking to yourself, this is another bourbon from Heaven Hill or another rye from Heaven Hill, you're going to be sorely mistaken, because it's not. It doesn't have, it's not as strong, if you will, on the front, definitely on the palate, and not as strong on the nose. It definitely has a good nose, but it's a softer and sweeter nose. But at 90 proof, at 7 years old, it's such a great whiskey. It drinks so well. It's great neat. It's great in any run of cocktails, from a very simple, old fashioned, all the way up to some of the more complex cocktails using, 2 or 3 or 4, in some cases, modifiers at a time. Is this anybody's first time having Bernheim? No, everybody's had it. I see one hand from Monica. Maybe it's her first time. Cool. What do you all think? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Do we like the Bernheim?
Love it. I love wheat to begin with, but this one's one of my favorites.
Cool. Yeah. This is one of the whiskeys that when talking to our production team, talking to our 2 master distillers at Heaven Hill that I've worked with in my 7 or 8 year career at Heaven Hill, we sort of coined the term training wheels whiskey, because when you're out talking to new consumers for the first time, I like to liken to that person who's a big vodka soda drinker, but maybe they've been wanting to get into whiskey, but they don't really like that burn that you get from, maybe an Elijah Craig or a Pikesville Rye or something like that. Start them off with this and let them sort of walk, tread slowly or wade into the shallow end of the pool, if you will. Any questions on Bernheim?
No, I love it, but I think I love it because I have a gluten allergy. So
you do? Yeah.
Of course.
Well,
you love everything that has wheat in it, gluten in it.
Yeah. Well, my wife is celiac. Well, all of these are perfectly fine for you because the gluten is removed in the distillation process. So you are A-okay.
Do you guys do a barrel-proof Bernheim?
We do not do a barrel-proof Bernheim. Who knows? That very well could be something coming. I mean, I would say that's probably one of the top 2 or 3 questions that every person that comes to see us in Kentucky asks, or that my boss, Bernie Lovers, who's our global American whiskey ambassador, when we do presentations, that's sort of the question of the moment, right? And it's
amazing. I love wheat at about 50 to 55%. I think it's the best right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out my controls here. There we go. So we'll move. This is a pretty easy transition, right? Because we're going from a wheat whiskey into a bourbon wheat or a wheated bourbon. And you can see that this mash bill is made up of the same exact grains, just in different percentages. And I'm happy to share all of our mash bills with all of y'all. I'm happy to share them with anyone, anytime I speak. They are public knowledge. We have them on our website. I shared the link to our fairly new heavenhilldistillery.com. It's about 2 or 3 years old now. A really, really, really informative and educational website. Of course, it's about Heaven Hill Distillery and our products, but a really good education for American whiskey. If you have anything, even if you want to get deep on some things like distillation and fermentation, yeasts, etc. But so the 68% corn, 20% wheat, 12% malted barley, that is our wheated bourbon recipe, or our Old Fitzgerald distillate, as we call it. I mentioned when we were talking about Bernheim, we acquired the Old Fitzgerald brand in 1999. A company that is now named Diageo decided that they should probably get out of American whiskey because it was dead. They sold us basically a brand new distillery, a distillery that had a location that has housed the distillery for over 100 years. They had basically retrofitted, and built from the ground up in 1991, and sold it to us along with a handful of brands in 99. And some of the brands that we acquired were Old Fitzgerald, like I said, Cabin Still, Christian Brothers Brandy in that purchase. And what happened in that purchase sort of was like a 3-team deal in the NBA. We got Old Fitzgerald, H&H, Buffalo Trace, Sazerac, et cetera, got Weller and the Pappy Van Winkle line. Luxco got Rebel Yell. There was a lot of all of the original wheated bourbon brands from Stitzel Weller, Old Judge Distillery had made it into the hands of Diageo, United Distillers as they were called at that time, at that point. And for various reasons, these went that way, those went that way, and those went that way. And we were, for the first time, finding ourselves with a wheated bourbon in our hand. And much like all of the regional brands that we had acquired, really since the downfall of American whiskey had started in 1960, we were just trying to keep the lights on for those brands. So a regional brand would be something that, maybe it was made and it only went to Kentucky, or it only went to Alabama, or like our Pikesville Rye, it only went to Maryland, Virginia, and the DC area. What we wanted to do when we acquired these brands was basically keep supplying the market that had it. In other words, if it sold 100 cases in 2019, we wanted to sell 100 cases of it in 2020. That was good enough. So we were tasked with trying to figure out, Parker and his son Craig were tasked with trying to figure out how to distill wheated bourbon with Old Fitzgerald, and that's where we were going. Now, the Old Fitzgerald brand, y'all that are big American whiskey fans may know, the story that Pappy Van Winkle sold the brand of Old Fitzgerald on was that John Fitzgerald worked for the distillery. He was the greatest palate in all of Kentucky, and he was the taster at the distillery, and he decided what went into what brand and what bottle. And in 1999, the same year that we acquired the brand, Pappy's granddaughter, Sally Van Winkle, wrote a book called The Story of Pappy Van Winkle, Always Fine Bourbon, The Story of Pappy Van Winkle and the True Story of John Fitzgerald. And in that book, she details the passing down of the knowledge from actually the last master distiller of the Old Judge Distillery, that yes, John Fitzgerald did work at the distillery, but he did not work for the distillery. He worked for the U.S. government. He was a U.S. Treasury agent in charge of monitoring the bonded rickhouses, making sure that the distillery was paying all the right taxes, all the barrels were gauged appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. And in that role, he was the only person that had unlimited and unfettered access to the warehouses, specifically in the middle of the night. And he was known to sneak into the warehouses and steal sips from not just the best barrels, but all of the barrels, therefore committing larceny. And you guys being fans of American whiskey, you're familiar with all of the stories behind all of these bottles and seeing all the bottles behind Monica. A lot of the stories have some truth to them. a lot of them have generated from a lot of brainstorming in boardrooms, right? How cool is it to be able to tell the story, the true story like that with a brand, when we were trying to come up with a line extension, an heir to the old Fitzgerald brand, if you will, that we could take national. So like I said, Old Fitzgerald was a regional brand. It was primarily bottled and bond. It wasn't something that we had enough weeded bourbon that we could take it at 100 proof, same season, et cetera, all the rules for bottled and bond. I'll get to that in the next whiskey. So we wanted to create a small batch, still overproof, but a small batch, extra aged, overproof weeded bourbon that we could take to the national market. And we did that with that story. And that story in that bottle is Johnny Fitzgerald's Larceny, which you see here. So it's about a 6 to 8 year old flavor profile, 92 proof, and really aligns with the themes of what we do at Heaven Hill Distillery. And that is longer. We like to keep our whiskey in the barrels longer than our friends throughout Kentucky. Stronger, we put it in the bottle at a higher proof than a lot of our friends throughout Kentucky and the rest of the country. And then, like I said, we try to offer the best quality product at the best possible price and offer you guys as much value as we possibly can with that whiskey that's in the bottle. So Larceny compares to other weeded bourbons out there on the market. Of course, Maker's Mark is the leader in that class. And then, of course, you have Weller, Rebel Yell, as I mentioned, and then more and more distilleries are coming out with weeded bourbons each and every day, it seems like. I think Woodford has one now. I know they have a wheat whiskey. I can't remember if they've come out with a weeded bourbon. Wyoming whiskey has a weeded bourbon. But there's definitely a fandom for weeded bourbon. And we're very proud of the Old Fitzgerald line, the bottled and bond decanters that you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with. The Johnny Fitzgerald Larceny, the small batch at 92 proof. And then to the previous question about Bernheim, the newest release in the Old Fitzgerald family, the Johnny Fitzgerald Larceny Barrel Proof, which we're about to release our third release of that, which will be the C920. The A120 and the B520 are absolutely fantastic. But Larceny is one of the 3 or 4 small batches that we have that comes out of our distillery. I mentioned the U.S. standards of identity. Small batch and single barrel, both are terms that are not defined by the U.S. standards of identity. Small batch and single barrel are basically marketing terms. Single barrel, of course, is pretty self-explanatory, but small batch can be a little convoluted and a little tough to understand, and that's because it really differs from distillery to distillery, right? And for us at Heaven Hill, small batch we define it as 150 barrels to 300 barrels for a dump per bottling run. So when you're talking about an overall collection of 1.7 million barrels and pulling 150 to 300 barrels at a time, that's pretty darn unique. And we're looking at weeded bourbon barrels with a specific flavor profile that our tasting team deems ready to be bottled, and that once mingled together and combined will make up the flavor profile that we're looking for that what you're getting in that Larceny small batch 92 proof. We have a taster on our quality control team. Her name is Tawny Goatee, and she's tasting about 100 to 150 samples of different spirits each and every day. Like I said, we're the largest family owned and operated distilled spirits company. So that means we have stuff in the realm of peppermint flavored all the way up to our straight bourbons and whiskeys, things like Hypnotic, pomegranate liqueurs, etc. She's an absolute machine and is tasting each one of these every day. So if you're ever back in Bardstown and you're ever introduced to Tawny, she's the one to give the biggest high five to, because she's tasting everything that comes out of our distillery. And like I said, is just an absolute machine. The fact that she's able to match all these flavor profiles day in and day out, especially with the volume of what she's tasting. Any questions on the Fitzgerald line or the Larceny? Cool. How's everybody doing taste-wise? see some similarities between the Bernheim and Larceny. Maybe the Larceny is a little bit hotter as it comes across that mid palate. You still get a lot of that sweetness and some resemblances from the Bernheim, but definitely a little bit more backbone, a couple more proof points. So,
Jack,
yes, Tracy, go ahead.
Sorry, we had a question from Monica, I believe. She says she's been to Heaven Hill, which is awesome. She says, is it open today for tastings?
Yes, we are open for tastings. We are following all of Kentucky State protocols and guidelines, which means we are much busier than we ever have been before, from a sense of it's harder to get a tour because we can only let so many people in at a time. But we are indeed busy. I actually set someone up earlier today for a tour on Friday out in Bardstown. Bardstown is a little bit bigger of an operation. It's a little bit more outside. We have a little bit more space to operate with. So it's a little bit easier to get on a tour there than it is at our downtown Louisville attraction, which is the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience. That's limited to about 6 people per tour, and when it's normally 20 people per tour, or pre-March 2020, 20 people per tour. So I said we were going to go up the ladder via proof. We're still going up, but we're going to go back down just for a quick stint after this Mellow Corn. Mellow Corn is actually a whiskey that we could have started the tasting off with. Show of hands, is this anyone's first time having Mellow Corn, or is everybody a member of the Children of the Corn? No, I like it. We got some new folks joining us into the Children of the Corn cult. So Mellow Corn is a brand that's been around since 1945. The bottle that you see there on your left was copyrighted and trademarked in 1945. I often joke that the day that we changed that bottle and label is my last day working for Heaven Hill. It's across the staff. You can tell from the t-shirt that Tracy's wearing, it's one of everyone's favorites. That bottle either repulses people or gets people very excited and starting to want to throw around a lot of high fives. And even the folks that are repulsed by the bright yellow label and the light straw color, within a few sips, they generally start moving in the other direction. Some of the bars and restaurants that I've sold it into, you'll get a bartender who's like, I got to have one of those bottles. I don't think my manager is going to let me have it in, but then by the next time I go back, it's moved underneath the bar. The locals are having shots of it, and by the next time I go back, it's on the cocktail menu. I mean, this is one that's has really developed a cult following for us throughout the country and now throughout the world, since we sell it in Europe. It's one of the brands that we acquired in the 1990s. I think I mentioned this. We acquired about 100 different whiskey labels in the decade of the 1990s, from the various closings of spirits companies, closings of distilleries, et cetera. And Mellow Corn is one of those. We don't produce a whole ton of it, although with COVID, we've started producing a lot more of it because the U.S. standards of identity state that if you're making a corn whiskey, you can either use a brand new uncharred oak container or a used whiskey barrel. So that differs from bourbon, rye, and wheat whiskey, where you have to use a brand new oak container that has been charred. So we're making a lot more corn whiskey now during COVID, because one of the biggest line items of our balance sheet at Heaven Hill is the sale of our used bourbon barrels across the pond to Scotland, down to the Caribbean for rum, into Mexico for tequila, and every other place around the world that makes some form of spirit that ages in an ex-bourbon barrel. And there's a lot of places that use that. We can't export those right now because of COVID restrictions. So we're actually running a lot more corn whiskey right now because we have a lot more used barrels sitting aside. So that's what you have to pay respect for that. everybody's familiar with the term bottled and bond. So I do just a quick overview of it. Bottled and bond, or as the law is fully called, the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, was in essence the first Consumer Protection Act put in place by the US government. The first law governing what we as Americans put in or on our body, almost 10 years before the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, and it was to govern our whiskey. There was bad rectified whiskey all over the place. People were getting sick, and in some cases even dying from drinking bad whiskey. Sounds pretty similar to what's been going on in some parts of the world over the course of the last 18 months with counterfeit whiskey. But that's besides the point. So the Bottled and Bond Act came into place, and what it states that to be bottled and bond, what's in the bottle must be from one distillery, one distiller. It must be from a distillate of one distilling season. There's 2 distilling seasons in a calendar year, January to June and July to December. It must be of the same type of cereal grains. It then must be aged after it has been distilled for a minimum of 4 years. It must be bottled at exactly 100 proof, exactly 100 proof, not 99.9, not 100.1, not 101, not 103, exactly 100 proof and 50% ABV. And then you must state on the bottle exactly where it was both distilled, barrel aged, and bottled. So I have an example of another one of our bottled and bonds here, Evan Williams Bottled and Bond, and I'll show you. Next time you're in your favorite Roco liquor store, you can look on the back of one of our bottles and you can see that each one of our bottled and bonds, I don't know if you can see this because of the glare, states DSP KY1 and DSP KY31. On the mellow corn, it's on the bottom of the label, directly underneath where it says straight corn whiskey on the 3rd line there in that small font. DSP KY1 is where we distill everything. That's in the Shively neighborhood of downtown Louisville. That's the distillery we acquired in 1999. And then DSP KY31 is where we barrel age and bottle everything. And that's at our original location in Bardstown, Kentucky. Our original distillery, where we barreled our first barrel of whiskey on December 13th, 1935, actually burnt to the ground on November 7th, 1996. One of our rick houses caught fire. It jumped to 6 other rick houses, all in all catching about 107,000 barrels of whiskey on fire, which created a river of fire that went downhill towards the water source. And guess what was at the bottom of that hill right next to the water source? Our distillery. So in about 24 hours, we lost over 100,000 barrels of whiskey and our ability to make any more. So that's a quick story about that. The great thing is the bourbon industry is really a family. Parker Beam's cousin, who was a Brown Foreman, called him and said, "Hey, how can we help?" And then his other cousins at his family's distillery, the Beam Company, said, "Hey, how can we help?" So really for about 4 or 5 years, we were actually mashing, fermenting, and distilling at both Brown Foreman and Beam when they had time on their stills. Pretty good timing. The mid-90s were a pretty darn heavy low point in the American whiskey industry. If that were to happen now, we would definitely be shit out of luck, as they say. So onto the whiskey and mellow corn. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this as I'm talking about it and telling you the story. You can see there at the bottom of the slide, I refer to this as Corn Pops whiskey. Corn Pops was one of my favorite cereal as a kid, and I really get that sweetness both on the nose and the front of the palate on this. It finishes really sweet, and then like it says on there in the bullet, sort of chewy, sort of funky, a little bit like a Caribbean rum, like a rum from Barbados, a Bajan rum. This is a whiskey that you can have a heck of a lot of fun with at your at-home bar. You can, of course, drink it neat all day long, but you can actually get pretty rowdy on the cocktail scene with this whiskey if you're into at-home bartending. Of course, you can make all of the traditional bourbon classic cocktails, old fashions, Boulevardiers, Manhattans, Cavas, etc. But give it a try in something like a tequila drink, a Paloma with mellow corn, a Bloody Mary with mellow corn. Its lightness, its sweetness, it lends itself to some other things. At the end of the day, it's still going to taste like one of those drinks with a little bit of whiskey in it. But it's a really interesting and a really fun bottle. It's a great bottle to have, like I said, for everyday drinking. It's a great bottle to have, you know, when you have your friends over to celebrate the weekend on a Friday night and do a nice socially distanced cheers. Any questions on the mellow corn? I can't see the chat, so maybe there's some in there.
Tracy, I have a question. What is your favorite way of drinking mellow corn?
My favorite way of drinking it is neat, but my second, it's almost like 1B, is in a Boulevardier. My favorite cocktail is a Boulevardier. And I was like, you know what? I've been drinking Boulevardiers with Elijah Craig for however many years when I decided this a handful of years ago. I was like, let's try it with mellow corn. And man, it's awesome. But the thing to keep in mind when you're drinking bottled and bond is, I reiterated it a couple of times, it is 100 proof. And 100 proof cocktails and a couple of those in a sitting makes for a pretty tough Wednesday after a Tuesday night. So as we say, what is it? Drink wisely, think wisely when you're doing, when you're handling some of these higher proof things.
Really quick, before you move on, Jack, there was a question about mellow corn. Andrew asked, are there any thoughts of doing something different with mellow corn as far as aging it longer or doing anything else? Yes.
I mean, we are all the time thinking about things to do with mellow corn. It is, you know, and that's the really exciting thing about how much of it that we're distilling now is I'm fingers crossed that in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there will be some fun things coming down the pipeline with some of the corn whiskey. I don't know if it'll be under the mellow corn label or not. It sort of depends on what we decide to do. You know, there's pretty strict restrictions on being bottled in bond, and a 6-month window, you know, when you're multiplying 1,320 or so barrels a day times 6 months, that does give you a pretty good palate to work with. But when you're looking at that, whatever that math is, I can't do it in my head, out of 1.7 million barrels, it still is fairly unique. So we'll see. I'm excited. I'm not holding my breath though. Can you guys hear me okay? I just realized that I had my volume all the way down on my computer. Cool. So like I said, we're going to jump back in proof a little bit. And I'm really excited. I'm excited and bummed at the same time because I don't have this whiskey in front of me, but the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel is our newest release. We just released this last month. And so far the returns have been really, really great, really, really positive. Everybody's really, really happy with it. Like I said in the jump, the Elijah Craig brand, we launched in 1986. And with the brand, we tell the story of Elijah Craig. We highlight his moniker of the father of bourbon, as he is given credit for being one of the first people to age his whiskey in charred barrels. How he got charred barrels to age whiskey in is lost in the annals of history. Whether it was a barn fire where he had to cobble together some charred barrel staves, or the only thing that he could get from Thomas Broadhead's general store in Louisville in the 1790s was barrels that had once aged pickles or fish, and he had to burn those out so that he could get a more neutral aging process. At the end of the day, we do know that he had to send barrels of whiskey to New Orleans, and it was about a 9-month trip on a flatboat or a Kentucky boat. These are basically flat wood panels that are put together and only powered by the power of how fast you can pull and push, and then the current of the water, right? So that took about 9 months to get from Elijah Craig all the way down to the port of New Orleans. And we actually have notes from consumers, from wholesalers in the port of New Orleans at that time, asking for this new whiskey. They didn't even know what to call it, so they just called it what they saw stamped on the barrel. And what was stamped on the barrel was the port of embarkation and the contents inside. So it came from the state of Kentucky. It came from the county of Bourbon, and its contents were whiskey. So Kentucky bourbon whiskey. And that's one of the stories as to how what we drink today called bourbon got its name. Of course, the French royal family's surname that helped us finance the Revolutionary War is also spelled the same way, pronounced Bourbon. So who knows? But again, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff written down in the American whiskey industry really until about the 1960s or the 1970s. So, like I said, it's a great story that has a handful of truth and maybe a little bit of marketing pizzazz thrown in there. There's a lot of discussion online if you get deep into the blogs about, was Elijah Craig really the first person to do it? There's no question that he was amongst the first 10 or so people that were doing it at that time. But hey, it's a story that we like, that we're going to keep telling. It's been put in print a couple of times over the course of the last 150 years, and we like it, and we really like the whiskey in the bottle. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important. So when we launched the Elijah Craig brand in 1986, as I said, the main line of the brand is the Elijah Craig small batch. And like I said, a small batch for Heaven Hill is 150 to 300 barrels at a time. In the case of Elijah Craig, we're using 8 to 12-year-old whiskey. It's about 50% barrels that are 11 and 12 years old and 50% barrels that are 8, 9, and 10 years old. That's the Elijah Craig small batch. That's also the basis for the Elijah Craig toasted barrel. So what we do with the Elijah Craig small batch is we get those 150 to 300 barrels of 8 to 12-year-old whiskey, we mingle it together, we then add water to it to get it down to 94 proof, and we bottle it. The Elijah Craig toasted barrel, we mingle those 8 to 12-year-old barrels together. We mix them all up, get the flavor profile good and constant throughout, and then we re-barrel that barrel-proof distillate. Add nothing to it. We re-barrel it in brand new barrels that have been both charred and toasted. And then we let that whiskey, at whatever proof it is, it's probably around 130 or so, maybe up to 140. We let that whiskey sit in those brand new barrels for 6 to 8 weeks to get some of those more sweeter vanilla, marshmallow style flavor profile, flavor notes, and nuances. And then after 6 to 8 more weeks in those new barrels, we take that back to the dump room. We re-dump them all. We re-mingle them together, get it a nice and constant flavor profile. We then add pure water to it to get it down to 94 proof, and we bottle that. So like I said, this product was released about 6 weeks ago, I think. So this is the first live tasting that I have done with it. And I'd be really excited to hear what everyone thinks about it. Anyone?
It's great. I love it.
Jack, I love it. You really get the chocolate, and the baking spices. It's not overpowering. You could sip this all day. Well, I could.
We won't stop you from doing that.
It's an improvement on the original Elijah Craig from a sweetness factor. I think I'd like to see it at a little bit higher proof because it's almost, the sweetness is just a little bit too much. So I think if you put another, put it at like 100 or 105 proof, closer to a barrel proof, I think it might kind of flatten out that kind of powerful sweetness, but it's good. I love it. I'm
sensing a theme from Jeff's preferred flavor profile and tasting profile. Yeah, I actually have a sample of this at barrel proof that's pretty darn exciting.
Can you send it to me?
I've only got about that much left, and I'm gonna go ahead and keep that. We're all about honesty here at Heaven Hill, right?
Barrel proof barrel pick of toasted barrel.
You have hit the nail on the head of the two most popular questions for every person that visits Heaven Hill. Cool. Well, I'm really excited that we were able to taste this whiskey tonight. I think it's really cool to be able to really, taste some of the mainline stuff, some of our core products in the case of Larceny, and then taste some of these new things and sort of esoteric things like the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel and Mellow Corn that we don't necessarily taste on a regular day. How are we doing from a time perspective? We got plenty of time, I think, right?
Yeah,
So we'll,
great, Jack. Or
sorry?
great for you.
Okay. We are moving. I'm going to see if I can change my volume here really quick because I'm having trouble hearing you guys. Let's see. Whatever. I'll figure it out. So the next whiskey that we're going to do is Rittenhouse Rye. Anybody's first time having Rittenhouse? Cool. Oh, okay, cool. Love it when there's some newbies to each and every one. So Rittenhouse, I would say, is the bottle that really put us on the map, especially when it comes to current day, and especially when it comes to the cocktail scene and bartenders specifically. 1999 is the year that everyone talks about when this resurgence and renaissance of classic cocktails started to happen. And in San Francisco, closer to y'all and where I live, and New York, Chicago, those are pretty much the three cities where this cocktail renaissance started. And it was, like I said at the jump, small batches and the single barrels that had been started to have been produced 10 to 15 years prior to that. And then the rye whiskeys, the pre-prohibition style rye whiskeys, like Rittenhouse, like Old Overholt, that bartenders started reaching for, once they started finding Jerry Thomas's cocktail books, once they started reading Harry Macalone's cocktail book, etc. And then we've sort of built off of that as more people, as the internet has grown, as the Mad Men phenomenon happened and all of America was drinking as much whiskey as Don Draper was one night a week for about 9 years, our portfolio and our popularity started to grow. But it all comes back to, in a lot of our minds, Rittenhouse. And this is another one of those products that we acquired in the 1990s. The brand was founded in 1934. It is named for Rittenhouse Square. So that diamond that you see on the front of the label on the bottle is actually not a diamond, it's actually a square. And if you're familiar with the monuments, if you will, of the East Coast, Rittenhouse Square is right smack dab in the middle of Center City, Philadelphia. And it's named for David Rittenhouse, who was, he was really a jack of a lot of trades, but he was, for all intents and purposes, for this discussion, and the reason he had a square named after him in Philadelphia, he was William Penn's right-hand man in the founding of the state of Pennsylvania. So when the brand launched in 1934, it was actually called Rittenhouse Square Rye Whiskey. And over the course of the last 9 decades, they dropped the square fairly soon, and it's just been Rittenhouse Rye. This is another one of the part of the stable of Heaven Hill's Bottled in Bonds. If I didn't mention this when we were talking about Mellow Corn, we are the lead purveyor of Bottled in Bond spirits out there. Bottled in Bond was basically left for dead. The drinkers that respected it and knew it really for the most part were basically dying off. I can't think of a better way to put it, by the 80s and 90s. And a lot of distilleries just stopped caring about having to meet the restrictions that were required to have it. But as I said, our first product that we kicked off with in 1939, after our first barreling in 1935, was Old Heaven Hill Springs Distillery Bottled in Bond. It had become known as the good stuff. Bottled in Bond had become known as the good stuff in the almost 40 years since the passing of the Bottled in Bond Act. And we really wanted to make that our focus as a young and startup young company and startup in the middle of the Fertile Crescent of the bourbon and American whiskey world in the 1930s. And it turned out to be a great decision for us. That old Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond was the #1 selling bourbon in the state of Kentucky by 1941. And it's really it's just become a part of our fabric and who we are. We have about 15 bottled and bonds today. There's about 50 bottled and bonds out there now. It's hard to put a number on it because it seems like each and every distillery, whether it be a micro distillery or one of the big guys like ourselves, everybody's adding bottled and bonds to their collections. And if you follow Fred Minnick, who's one of the leading writers in American whiskey, Fred gives credit to, I mentioned him earlier, my boss, Bernie Lovers, as being probably the person responsible for the resurgence of bottled and bond, because he's been out screaming the importance of it really for his entire 15 to 20 year career in American whiskey. That uniqueness, having to pull from the same distillery, the same distiller, the same distilling season, the whiskey in bottled and bond really makes it unique. And when you want to talk about the terroir, if I can be so bold as to use that wine term when we're talking about whiskey, or the flavor profile that a distillery is known for, get to know each and every distillery that you enjoy as bottled and bonds and compare them to other distilleries that you like bottled and bonds. And that's a good way to start to figure out what a distillery's flavor profile is overall. But when we're talking about Rittenhouse, it really became a bartender's favorite because of that strength that it has in it, right? It's 100 proof, it's 4 years old, but it's a rye whiskey. That 51% rye along with that 100 proof just gives it the strength that you're looking for when you're making a classic cocktail that has a bunch of modifiers, right? Because remember, classic cocktails came to be because they were trying to, in a lot of cases, cover up bad whiskey. So you need a whiskey, when you're using good whiskey now, you need a good, strong whiskey that's going to be able to cut through a modifier, a vermouth, a bitter or something like that you're putting in one of those cocktails that you're making at home. And Rittenhouse is one where for me, I really like to talk about blind tastings. I think a lot of people get very centered in on what they think is their favorite whiskey. And sometimes it can be led by, what you saw in a magazine, what you saw on the website you were on earlier, what you saw on the billboard as you were stuck in traffic, et cetera. And you start to develop these inherent notions of what a whiskey is going to taste like, what a whiskey should be. And in a lot of cases, they're wrong. For me personally, I developed this thought that I didn't like Rittenhouse. I didn't like drinking it neat. It was fine for me in a cocktail because at the end of the day, I was really going for the flavor of the cocktail, right? Not so much the whiskey. And when bottled and bond really started to come back 2 or 3 years ago, and other distilleries were putting out bottled and bond ryes, I was like, all right, it's time to sit down and really get to understand what it is I don't like about Rittenhouse. And I did a blind tasting, and I was expecting Rittenhouse to be the bottom pick. And as I guess luck would have it, Rittenhouse was my favorite one. And these tasting notes that you see here just really jumped out at me. And I had never tasted those before because I went in with it with such a closed mind, right? The dried fruit, there's something about Rittenhouse, and I don't get a lot of these esoteric flavor profiles when I'm tasting whiskey. But for some reason, dried apricot really jumped out at me when I was blind tasting what ended up being Rittenhouse, and that spiced fruit. And it's that along with that 100 proof that I think is, and along with the 4 years on the wood that I think really allows Rittenhouse to shine. Whether you're going to a bar, getting takeaway cocktails, or experimenting at your own at-home bar now. Any questions on that? I saw a couple of flashes of the chat box pop up while I was talking.
Yeah, some of those flashes you saw were everyone commenting on the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel, saying it was some of their favorite.
Mm.
Yeah.
Very good. We're very happy. We're very happy about that. We're very happy about that. So I believe the next and final whiskey, as I mentioned, when we launched in 1935, our intention was to release a bottled and bond whiskey. And of course, as you know, after I walked you through what the regulations are of the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, you have to wait 4 years. So in 1939, we released the old Heaven Hill Springs Distillery Bottled and Bond. It quickly became the #1 selling bourbon in the state of Kentucky. And then over the course of really the next, we'll call it 40 to 50 years, that was our lead dog. It was our lead dog in our straight whiskey, our straight bourbon, coming out of our distillery. In 1957, we released the Evan Williams brand for the first time to start telling the story of Kentucky's first licensed distiller. The reasoning for that brand was, like I said, in 1942, when the government called to shut down distilleries for the production of beverage alcohol to help with the war effort, no one was prepared for that. Basically, people were out of whiskey a couple of years into World War II. Well, when the Korean War was on the horizon, distilleries were like, we're going to be smart. We're going to ramp up production now so that when the government calls, we're not going to have a shortage. Well, the government never called. So for the first time, there was a glut of American whiskey. Everybody had all these barrels sitting on their hands, and they needed to figure out something to do with it. So every distillery, I'm sure one distillery started and then everyone followed suit. They started putting extra aged whiskey in ceramic and glass, not vases, but decanters for the first time. Really fancy packaging, which I'm sure you've seen, because I still see a lot of them around sitting on bar tops and top shelves at bottle shops today. They started putting extra age whiskey, and by extra age, I mean over 6 years old, with age statements in these very ornate packages to try to make people think it was a better product than it was. And I say it like that because if you could speak to your grandfather or your great-grandfather or what have you, anyone in your family or an acquaintance that was drinking whiskey in the middle part of the 20th century in America, they weren't drinking anything over 4 to 6 years old. Anything over 4 to 6 years old was thought to be spoiled or bad. Of course, as we know now, that's not the case, but no one was drinking extra age whiskey. No one was definitely drinking stuff that was 12, 15, 18, 23 years old. That's really a phenomenon that has come to be in the last decade or so. And that's when we created the Evan Williams brand. And then over the course of time, our Evan Williams brand surpassed the old Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond, probably because the Bottled and Bond drinker started to expire, right? And Evan Williams bourbon has become our lead dog. It's the #2 selling bourbon in the world. And it's really the heart and soul of what we do at Heaven Hill Distillery. We like to call Evan Williams the engine that pulls the train car of all of our other products. Well, so what happened was, remember I asked everyone to show of hands who's heard of Heaven Hill at the beginning of this? I do that because the name of our distillery, the name of our company was sort of forgotten to time, even though we were still a major producer of American whiskey. And that's because we didn't really advertise ourselves under our company name, and we didn't really because we didn't have a bottle that was nationwide under that flag, right? We really became a purveyor and marketer of brands, right? Evan Williams, Elijah Craig, Old Fitzgerald, Rittenhouse, etc. But we didn't talk about ourselves as Heaven Hill. We didn't talk about ourselves as Heaven Hill Distillery and one of the 5 major heritage distilleries in Kentucky. And we had that light bulb go off a handful of years ago. And we started by launching the website that I put into the chat at the get-go of the conversation tonight. And then we started re-releasing whiskey under the Heaven Hill banner. We released the Heaven Hill 27-year-old, which you could say is a pretty big cannonball into the deep end of American whiskey marketing, a 27-year-old bourbon. That happens almost never. And then the second release and the second process was to pull back some of our other whiskeys that were in regional release and put out what at some point and eventually will become a national release of this Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond, to really help us tell the story each and every day of who we are as a heritage distillery. You can see on the label of this bottle a picture of that original distillery, Old Heaven Hill Springs, as it looked in 1935. This product, the 7-year-old Bottle and Bond, was released last fall in 2019 and garnered, even after only about a month or two of being out there, Whiskey Advocate's World Whiskey of the Year. Like I said, we are the industry's lead purveyor of bottled and bond spirits. So it was it's only appropriate that we should have a nationally released product that is a Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. And we're just over the moon with the reception of this product, and how well it's been received and how well it's been selling and how well it tastes, how good it tastes. I'm not sure if well it tastes is good grammar, but it's approaching 10:30, if not past it, where I am. So pardon my grammar if that wasn't correct. Is this anyone's first time trying the Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond? Speaking of whiskeys that I'm sad that I don't have in front of me tonight.
Why the one?
Say that one more time.
1% rye.
Oh, that's a typo. Should be 10.
Okay, never mind. I was like, just throw in 1% rye at the end there? Or?
Yeah, no, that would add up to, what does that add to? 80, 90 or 91? Yeah, that's a typo.
It's 12% rye.
Yeah, I'll fix that real quick. So we don't.
So I got to follow this for my birthday, and it was the first time I had tried it. And because I'm a huge Heaven Hill fan all around, like I age Evan Williams whiskey in barrels and all kinds of stuff. And I have to say that I was super, super impressed by the Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond. It's an amazing pour.
Awesome. Love that. There we go. How's that? Perfect. I hate typos on PowerPoints. Sorry about that. Well, tell me a little bit about how you're aging Evan Williams. Are you aging Black Label, and are you doing it in small barrels? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing it in small barrels here. I can show you, it's right behind me. So I'm doing it in small barrels. So the 1783.
That's a smart man.
And then I got a bunch of them in these small 3-liter barrels.
Oh, cool.
That's a finished barrel right there, a cab finish. And then I've got a port and I'm going to get a sherry seasoned one going too. But the 1783 is such a solid bourbon. It's just fun to kind of add a little bit of stuff to it, kind of like the toasted barrel Elijah Craig. You still a little bit to it, and it's amazing what you can get.
Yeah, the Evan Williams 1783 and then the Evan Williams single barrel, I would say, are probably our two most unsung heroes in the portfolio. And we're really excited about what's to come from Evan Williams 1783. We're actually going to be re-releasing and relaunching that here in the next 6 to 8 months or so. We had hoped to already have that in place by now, but as with everything, COVID sort of had some other ideas.
That the Evan Williams Bottle and Bond is the best $14 bottle out there too. That to just a daily sipper, that bottle is unreal.
Yeah. We appreciate that. I'm going to take this recording and share it everywhere. Oh, hi, Walter.
We've got another member of our team on. Walter Inman just joined a little while ago, and he said it's going to be a rock star, the 1783.
Yeah.
Pretty excited about it.
I'm just looking through the chat
Jack,
as you guys are talking. I'm just reading.
What do you do with the toasted barrels? That was one of my questions in there. Did those get? I mean, I could envision Scotch in a toasted barrel would be kind of cool.
Putting Scotch in a toasted barrel?
Like, what do you do after they're used? Obviously, you can't ship them anywhere, so.
I mean, that's the big question right now, right? Because we just, we've just dumped those first barrels during COVID. Stay tuned. We don't know. I mean, my assumption is that they will stay in America, and they will age corn whiskey, and they will probably find their way to some breweries. There's one brewery in Chicago that I'm thinking of specifically that we have a relationship, called Goose Island, which you may be familiar.
Yep, good beer.
Yeah, toasted mellow corn, that could be an interesting one. Yeah, but the project, the Toasted Barrel project, is something that was a project that we worked hand in hand with one of our three cooperage partners, Independent Stave Company, which is really the biggest one out there. They have just a really, really impressive dude who's their head of innovation, their head of wood innovation. Andrew Weisbrand is his name. And our team, our distilling team, our brand team, and Andrew all worked hand in hand, really developing what that end product is for the Toasted Barrel, for Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel. So
toasted versus char, a different level of char, or?
Yeah, so it is a different level of char and a toasting. So all of our traditional straight whiskeys outside of, well, I guess even including mellow corn, are aged in barrels that have been charred to a level 3, which is about 45 seconds. So the Toasted Barrels, they're actually charred to a level 1, and then they're toasted after that, because you have to continue to still be able to just call it a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, as opposed to being called it a finished whiskey or something like that, which we really didn't want to say. We had to continue using new cooperage and charred cooperage. We couldn't just toast it, otherwise that wouldn't fit the bill, as the Standards of Identity has the definitions of bourbon written out. So it's about I want to say a 15-second char to be a level 1 char, which surprisingly enough, some of those have found to actually add some really, really good flavor. Like an age statement on a whiskey bottle, the level of char, the higher the level of char doesn't necessarily mean better flavor, better and deeper flavor. Yeah. What else?
Hey guys, I'm gonna drop the link back into the chat for if any of these bottles really jumps out at you and you'd like to have them for your home bar, please check that out. This link is going to be active for about a week, is typically how long we keep it up on Ro's website. And when you guys do click on there, you're going to see some pretty good deals and some pretty solid discounts on everything that we went through tonight. So make sure you check that out and keep Ro's kid fed. So let's see. Do we have any other questions for Jack while we still have him? Because I mean, again, he's on the East Coast, guys. So if we don't have any questions, we should probably let him get back to the fam, or at least,
they're long asleep, and I wasn't able to have a cocktail while they were enjoying one this afternoon because I had to be able to talk without losing my train of it. So I'm happy to hang out for a little bit.
When are you guys bottling Parkers this year?
It's currently being bottled.
Yes.
It's going to be a 10-year-old bourbon and a heavy char. So last year's release was our first rye release under the Parker's label, also under a heavy char. So it's sort of a theme that we're going with. Like I said, when someone asked me about malt whiskey, heavy char is one of the experiments that we have been doing a good bit with as of lately. So I haven't tasted it yet, so I'm looking forward to. I will probably be able to taste it next week, I'm hoping.
Is that a 5 or a 6 or?
Yeah, 5.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah, so that's about a minute and a half on fire.
What is the proof on that, Jack, again? Is it going to be 100?
On the Parkers, I'm not sure. I think it's overproof. I believe it's 110.
Oh, okay.
What was and you can throw it in the chat if you don't feel like speaking up. What was everyone's? How did you guys rank the whiskeys tonight? The 5 or 6 whiskeys that you had as far as favorite.
Looks like from some of the comments, it looked like the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel might have been, but I'm not sure. Let's see.
I'm always a fan of the mellow corn. It just from packaging to price point to like you said, I think it was a perfect description to be like, you can sip on it, you can cocktail with it. It gives you that flexibility, and it's a little bit different too in terms of the taste profile as well. And at this point, I just want things that are just a little bit more interesting and a little bit different, and that ticks a lot of boxes. And Tracy, I have that same T-shirt, and
I was just going to say thank you. I'm glad that you have it, and you said it's one of your favorites.
It's you can't beat that Collie, that cotton poly blend. It's a perfect shirt, and the logo on it looks great. So I'm just a sucker. I'm a sucker for that.
That's the most comfortable T-shirt in America, I think.
I am the favorite of most people on the sales team, I think.
Yeah. I remember I walked into an account wearing it, and they were really upset because they didn't have one in their size. So I was like, well, there's your reason to lose weight, buddy. Get after it.
We're actually
over. She didn't have my size either, extra large.
What, Ro? And you didn't even ask for one at a separate time? Come on,
I didn't want you to tell me to go lose weight.
We're on Monday night next week. We're doing Bernie and I are doing a tasting with the Reddit group called Children of the Corn, which is a mellow corn Reddit group, which will be entertaining, I imagine. The posts since we responded and announced to them have been hilarious. A very creative crew.
Oh, that's fun.
Drew, as a non-bourbon lover, how would you rate these 1 to 5?
Oh man, I don't want to burn bridges right now.
There's no bridges to burn.
I mean, I love the mellow corn, and then for me, I go right into that, right into the Rittenhouse. It's always been one of my favorite ryes, and I guess when I say like I'm not the biggest American whiskey fan, like I love ryes. I think ryes are so much fun, and again, it's about just having a different taste profile, and there's a lot of variance there. The Burheim was new for me, so that was a cool little mix up. I'm glad that I got to try that one, and then probably the bottled and bond, the last one, and then the Toasted Barrel, it's a little too sweet for me, but again, it's cool that they're continuing to do cool stuff and new things. So. But I remember the tasting when we did it in person, and this was fun to revisit some of those ones and be like, oh yeah, that is awesome, and stuff like that. So, and I'm never going to miss an opportunity to drink, the mellow. So I'm
sure.
I'm into
yeah,
that.
no, I mean, I would say, I mean, like I said, there's no bridges to burn. I mean, at the end of the day, what you taste is what you taste, and what you're drinking is totally your choice. And I think there's a flavor profile to fit everyone, I think, in our distillery. And if there isn't, and you find one at one of our friends' distilleries throughout Kentucky, hey, enjoy it. I mean, one of the things that a story that Bernie, to talk about him again, told me, because I used to get when I first came into this role, I was nervous about especially groups like this. Because, it was my assumption that everybody wants esoteric tasting notes, right? Like, are we getting lavender? Are we getting rosemary? Are we getting boot leather, tobacco, marzipan, whatever it is? And I don't taste any of that. I half the time I can't even remember the word marzipan. And Bernie said, well, a funny story. I was with Parker Beam and Jimmy Russell, at Whiskey Fest in Chicago, and I think it was 2012 or something like that. He had just started with us, and a gentleman had approached the three of them as the tasting was ending, and he was giving him his tasting notes of cherry and tobacco and leather, etc. He walked away, and Parker turns to Jimmy and goes, "Jimmy, I don't know about you, but I didn't put any of that shit in my mash tub. I just taste good whiskey," and took a sip, and they all laughed. And I was like, that's a great story. That's amazing. At the end of the day, whatever pour is your pour and makes you feel like you're tasting good whiskey, that's what matters. You know, we hope that one of our whiskey, you can find that in one of our whiskeys. But at the end of the day, we're making it to be enjoyed and consumed, and there you go.
Awesome.
And what Walter actually just put in the comments is 100% true. No matter whether you are me, Tracy, Walter, Vince, Drew, or our master distiller. Like I said, I've worked with two of our master distillers, and I've been with both of them where they've been like, shit, this larceny is delicious today. It's totally different than the pour that I had yesterday, or the Pikesville, or whatever it is. So
depends on what you ate that day, what you were drinking that day, same here. I've had larceny when I very first got it, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then 6 weeks later, I was like, wow, this is way different than I thought it was. And then it becomes amazing again. It just it changes all the time.
Yeah, the moral of the story, everybody, is just keep drinking. Don't stop. A few of us make our livings off of this, so please never stop.
Right.
Another question that I keep on getting from everybody about the larceny barrel pick. I know we had put on there that if we found the larceny barrel pick, we would throw a sample for everybody on the tasting. Now we finally found the barrel pick, and what we will do is we have the list of everybody that's on this tasting. So I will email you guys the link of the larceny barrel pick before we release it to the Whiskey Society. So everybody who attended this tasting will get the barrel pick link before we do it on an official release on the Whiskey Society.
And just so you guys know, we're trying to figure out the next event. Obviously, it's kind of a weird situation right now with places somewhat opening, but not really opening. So we're just trying to gauge interest and see if people, actually want to get together, or if we should continue to move forward with the virtual stuff. We're currently working on that right now, but you can believe that we're going to have that out there and up as soon as possible when we have it figured out. We do have another event through Rocco at the end of the month, which I'm hoping to God it's our last virtual event. And that's going to be, if you guys are looking to get into tequila, we're doing a tasting with Fortaleza. So if there's anyone to take the dive with, it is. Yeah, and we're gonna get the new Lot 100. So if you guys are agave fans, it's a pretty big deal that we were able to secure a bottle. So we'll have that. Ro's always trying to get us the coolest and most fun stuff and expand your guys' palates. Again, it's one of those things. Just drink as much as you possibly can, because anything that you do drink that's different is only going to improve your palate. So, when we get the experts in here, like Jack and Tracy, it's fun because, they have all this shared experience, and they have all this deep knowledge of the products they're working with, and, they can reference other things and do that. So we appreciate you guys for joining us tonight. We are going to upload this to YouTube eventually, and you'll be able to share it with your friends and things like that, or revisit it and see, maybe how do these whiskeys taste, in a few weeks to you, or, depending on the ones you pick up. So check out that link. It should be good for about a week. Jack, thank you so much for your time, man. I'm sure it was a long day coming from the East Coast. Tracy, thank you so much for your help, on everything throughout this. It's been fun to work with you on that. And again, to everybody in the River City Whiskey Society, you guys are the best. We appreciate you. You keep all of us admins motivated and looking to do cool stuff with you. the group has grown tremendously in the past 6 months. We have, the computer time is really catching up with everybody. But we've added so many amazing people to this group, and a lot of them are here tonight. So you guys, thank you for joining the group. Keep posting your photos on the Facebook page. Keep sharing whiskeys. Just keep it up, and we really, really are enjoying it. And eventually, we're going to make Jeff share all of his aged whiskey with us. So that's going to be, maybe that'll be one of our future tastings.
Yeah, and I hope to be able to join you guys in person sometime soon. And on any of that social media, if you want to tag me, I'm at JackChoate16. So just my name and then 16. And then the distillery's Instagram handle is just at Heaven Hill Distillery.
Awesome. Yeah. So go and follow Jack, and follow the brands. And like I said, you guys keep drinking. We've got to put our kids through school. So if there's anything else,
Thank you.
No, good. Yeah. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Drew.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Bro.
night.
Hi guys, cheers.
Everybody.
Stay
Drew,
safe out there.
sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Drew. You dropped off.
I'm still here, Travis.
I was hoping to catch you mentioned uploading these to YouTube. What channel or link are you doing these on? Can I follow that?
Yeah, I'll put it onto it's my channel right now. So this is a very selfish endeavor. I'll go ahead and put it on there. It has like most of our tastings that we've done, a lot of our virtual happy hours as well. So I'll put that in the River City group, and then you'll be able to check it out there. Actually, let me see if I can just.
That'd be great, because I usually don't drink the entire thing, and I kind of go back later and I forget notes that we talked about.
Totally.
And it'd actually be great to reference that.
Yeah. Let's see here.
And Drew, can you send Tracy a logo of the Whiskey Society if you guys have one?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not a problem. We can get that over there.
Cool.
Let's see here.
Bye, guys. Have a
Bye,
great night.
Jack. Take
Thanks
care.
again.
Safe travels.
Enjoy it.
Bye, everybody.
Let me go ahead and